It seems like, again, this episode will be heavy-hearted and not filled with gifs and memes, because I'm gutted. Again, it's sickening, it's heartbreaking. What happened in Uvalde, Texas is disgusting. An act of pure cowardice and malevolence. And this time should be reserved for the mourning of those 19 children and 2 teachers killed May 24th, 2022. But 10 days after the Buffalo, New York mass shooting, this tragedy will be and has already been politicized, and it has reignited gun talks. And let's be honest, it's time to talk. I'm an advocate for gun rights. I own multiple guns. I fully support the Second Amendment and hold true the core of what those gun rights intend. Like all of our Bill of Rights, they are aimed at protection of individual liberty. And let's face the truth, even in a modern society, the threat of a tyrannical government, whether it's our own or external, is no less significant than it was in 1789. We have current examples around the world of the degradation of freedom in places like Venezuela and Hong Kong. Even as recently as the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which spawned a mass issue of guns to Ukrainian citizens in an effort to stave off foreign invaders. And by most accounts, it's working. Even places like Taiwan and South Korea live under constant threat of being invaded. And those are just external threats. So the importance of maintaining our right to defend ourselves is still paramount. And in the midst of this tragedy, with the loss of those babies, it's easy to blame the weapon. It's easy to have knee-jerk reactions. It's easy to rationalize stripping away individual protections. It's easy to demonize guns, because the situation surrounding gun rights in itself is not easy. And it's hard to accept that a person with ill intent will carry out horrendous acts regardless. We should learn from our immediate reaction to 9/11 and how our complacency in allowing government to enact one of the most intrusive infringements on privacy with the Patriot Act and the authorization for the use of military force, which both have been abused. And in cases of the AUMF, they've contributed to needless deaths of hundreds of our military service members and innocent lives abroad, with continued increase of drone strikes. The senseless loss of these children's lives, or any victim of gun violence, should not be swept away and should not be ignored. We do have a mental health stigma in this country. Our schools are too soft of a target, and by every statistical metric, we do have a gun violence problem. But those statistics are commonly misrepresented and offered without context. Because of course, America has more guns, therefore yes, there's going to be more gun violence. Even though the leading weapon used in violent crimes throughout the world are knives, and the US falls significantly short in that comparative. As far as the mental health aspect, it's self-explanatory. End the stigma. Provide better training to student guidance counselors. Incorporate mental health care in every facet of medical insurance coverage and treatment facilities. Provide mental health awareness in schools for students. Our world is significantly more complicated than in previous generations. Parents may not recognize the struggles in their children, and when peers, no matter how young, can identify symptoms of mental health in their friends, help can be provided much earlier. And when it's young adults and older teenagers committing some of these atrocities, early intervention could save lives. Vulnerability of the schools needs to be addressed. And as we learn more about the shooting in Uvalde and how it took nearly an hour for authorities to gain access and neutralize the threat,
of course it was not the right decision, it was the wrong decision, period.
Which parallels the Parkland High School shooting and the hesitation to intervene by security guard Scott Peterson, it's apparent that local authorities and rent-a-cops are not properly trained for these intense scenarios. because they're too busy detaining parents trying to help their kids than taking action. And for the anti-gun group, these are the same authorities you're entrusting you and your children's lives and safety to, which isn't exactly a resounding testament to those without means to protect themselves. It's been mentioned before that our veterans and former police officers with adequate training, armament, and actual desire to help without hesitation would provide far superior protection for our children, and I completely agree. And it can't be ignored that all schools and many of these mass shootings occur in gun-free zones. I'm not saying that all teachers should be armed, but those with adequate training and concealed carry permits should be allowed to carry if they're comfortable. And our schools should not mirror prisons. They should not be bracketed by fencing or metal detectors. That would be psychologically damaging to young kids. But security doors for all exterior accesses that can't be opened from the outside could be upgraded. Ballistic windows and emergency locks and monitoring services could all be implemented. But what can we do about the guns themselves? Because it's clear that doing nothing isn't the answer. Our Second Amendment rights should not be compromised, but our rights should not negate our responsibility. And in an effort to make gun ownership safer, there are concessions the right, and even my types, the libertarians, can make without restricting American citizens' access to safe, legal, and responsible gun ownership. But things like a limit on quantity or gun types, magazine size, or ammo restrictions aren't going to mitigate much. Switzerland is always the shining example touted by gun rights supporters on how a mostly armed society maintains peace. But they have much stricter requirements in acquiring guns. And that's something we should emulate. Common sense gun laws for acquisition shouldn't be used to restrict access to law-abiding citizens, but it should promote responsible gun ownership. Training is also paramount. It has been available as an elective in schools in the past, and there are some bills within states like Arizona that are reintroducing that idea. And like concealed carry permits, every person that desires to own guns should require to attend gun safety courses. Things like universal background checks to include gun shows and online sales don't restrict access to guns. It would only delay immediate possession. And there should be a waiting period for first-time buyers. Again, it's not restricting access, just delaying it. I don't think raising the age limit for purchase of weapons would be any significant institution. We trust our young adults to represent and defend this nation at 18 with military service. They should be extended that same courtesy domestically. But other than educational requirements and quotas, the same eliminating factors for military service should apply to initial gun ownership acquisition. That doesn't mean a person initially denied cannot readdress gun ownership after a determined time period. And most people agree that the only restriction for gun ownership should be those convicted of violent crimes. And only those convicted of violent crimes like domestic abuse, assault, or gang affiliation should be restricted. Pretty much every victimless crime should not. That includes felony convictions. And things like red flag laws are extremely dangerous, subjective, and intrusive to personal privacy, and they should not be a metric to implement any effort of gun safety. There are things that could be done to mitigate some nefarious actions without compromising our right to protection through gun ownership. Because I truly believe that every able-bodied American should own a gun or 200 guns, and it's frustrating that Republicans and even most libertarians will parrot verbatim the Second Amendment's "shall not infringe" in an effort to inhibit gun restriction talk, all the while completely ignoring the 14th Amendment's verbatim "all persons born" when banning abortion and restricting pro-choice rights. There is a fine line between our right to protect ourselves, our right to gun ownership, and our responsibility. But there's a guarantee afforded to us by our Constitution in the Second Amendment. But common sense gun laws to access, not ownership itself, should be the good faith conversation had by our representatives. Because whether we want to accept it or not, doing nothing is no longer the feasible solution.